Welcome to Doc NYC's 2023 Spring Showcase, or mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. I'm Ruth Somalo, Senior Features Programmer at Doc NYC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Q&A for the hit Netflix docuseries, The Murdaugh, a Southern Scandal. We will be speaking today with creators Julia Willoughby, Nason, and Michael Gasparro. They are the director and executive producer, and the showrunner and executive producer. Welcome both. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure. So you're not new to true crime. You had you created the Emmy-nominated Hulu docuseries Fire Fraud that dug into the fraudulent music festival, the super cool show about the billion-dollar pyramid scheme, Lula Reach. So what brought you to this particular story of the Murdaugh family in South Carolina in particular, and to true crime in general?
Julia?
Well, I would say I would toss it to Mike because in general, the Cinemart and Mike and I have been working in true crime and investigative documentary stories for years. And so this just seemed to fit perfectly into what we already do. But I'd like to say that Mike really found the story. So Mike, take it from here in terms of like what was interested you at first and how'd you bring it to me and the team?
I mean, it really came off of Lula Rich, funny enough, because we were finishing that project. And actually one of our exec at Amazon, where Lula Rich played, moved over to Netflix. And it was like the summer of 2021. I can't remember when we dropped Lula Rich, but anyway, Lindsay, who's at Netflix now, called me and said, "Hey, are you following the story? I think she just started over at Netflix." And I said, "Yeah, I'm checking it out." And it was happening in real time. And she's like, "Can you get access?" And I said, "Yeah, let me try." And that's kind of how it started. And I hit up Julie and I said, "Hey, I'm tracking the story, and we're trying to get access." And that's kind of how it started. And we got access. Let's see, August 2021, Lindsay. And then September is when we got access to the kids on the boat. And they were like, "All right, let's go." So that's kind of how it started.
So that was going to be my next question. Like you have like a chronology of like 5 bodies, 6 years. You set up at the beginning of the show the broad scale of the relationship with the Murdaughs at the beginning. Then you go back to 2019 to the boat crash. And then you go back and forth in the timeline, all the way to 2021, which you just told us that is when you start getting into the story, and then back to 2015. So tell us a little bit about how did you arrive at the structure of the series, decided the content of each episode, a little bit of like, how did the production parallel the investigation and what was going on in real time, a little bit of that, if you can.
Julia?
Yeah, so I mean, the way we wanted to use the boat crash as the thesis to open up this 100 years of corruption of the Murdaughs. So because the kids on the boat were our main characters, we really led the structure of the piece through their stories and interviewed them about their experience with the Murdaughs through this horrible tragedy on the boat. So they really lead us back. Like Morgan tells us what it was like being with Paul, what his parents were like, what her parents, that they never even knew who the Murdaughs were. Like they're kind of transplants in the South from the North, and that's how that's how we structured it. And then when we go back to the other deaths of Stephen Smith and Gloria Satterfield, that's kind of we wanted to bring the viewer back at that moment to show a pattern. Once we establish the world through the kids' eyes, then we can go back further in time to really see the fabric that's building up, what's to come in, the last episode, which is pretty dramatic.
Yeah, no, I think Julia's spot on. I mean, like, I think for Julia, and I think when they're making these things is that, it's very salacious. And for us, it's not what we want to do. So we had to find the inroads of the human story. And it was through the kids on the boat, and it was happening in real time. And the one thing we had was something that had happened already. Those stories are much easier to tell because we're not the news or reporters where we're chasing stories. This story had that element, but the boat was basically the beginning of the fall of this dynasty. And I think that we were like, let's have the boat, and then we'll follow this story, how it unfolds, over the next year or so.
Yeah, you do a great job, I think, because navigating the sensibilities of like working with all those young people also, because it's pretty raw for them. And I particularly like the way that you treated Paul's character, how we slowly understand the depth of his life. And, we go from the beginning as like he's one of more of the friends in this, great story of friendship. Then we see him going like a little bit into like a perpetrator kind of character that, a little violent to his girlfriend, then a little reckless with the boat driving and, the situation that came after. But then we also perceive him as a victim of neglect of his own family, and ultimately even like a victim murder. So tell us a little bit. I mean, I thought that was really important because he's like a young person that is also trapped in this whole saga of the family. So tell us a little bit about crafting those characters and navigating the sensibilities of working with like really young people that are also very raw in their emotions.
Yeah, it's always, hard for these characters to open up, especially about the worst time in their life and being so young too. So we were very careful to hold them, very gently through the process of the interview, make sure we take breaks and ask them if they're okay. And I think a lot of the characters knew our previous work, and that we've, been able to build trust with people in really hard moments in their life. So I think there's that. And then in terms of Paul, and, we wanted to humanize him because essentially he could really be seen, he drove this boat allegedly and someone was killed. So off the bat, he's a villain. But, it's not that interesting just to like rubber stamp somebody. So we wanted to show how maybe he got so reckless and like where the roots were for him to go astray potentially and have, a lot of problems with drinking and, certain other things. And, with his girlfriend, she really loved him. They were so young and they had good energy together. So we wanted to really bring the complexity of relationships to life through really Morgan's eyes and all the other kids around her.
Yeah, you have to humanize. I think it's very easy just to pinpoint or make Paul just a horrible person, but he was 19 years old and he was part of this dysfunctional upbringing in a way. But it was also a snapshot in his life. So it's like, this kid ends up being murdered at 22, or, he's got how many, by 40, he could be a different human being completely. So I think it's amazing that you saw that and how we portrayed Paul, because that was really important to us, to make him a human, to humanize him, because you could easily go another direction with him. So.
Yeah, I think everybody is like really evenly portrayed, to be honest, like even the worst of them all in the story. So I think that's really important because, we tend to think of true crime as this kind of like a little bit over the top, sensationalistic, stories. But I think you're bringing it down to like a more documentary, based story where like you really respect all the characters. So
Yeah, you
really.
have to, because we can't get them to sit with us without having a human relationship with them. And we still have relationships with people we worked with 8 years ago or whatever, because it's not a thing where you're just doing a snap and doing like a 1 hour thing. We're telling their stories, and you build these like relationship with them. So they trust you. So when they're in a chair with Julia asking questions for 10 hours in a day, Morgan was literally telling that story for the first time to strangers, to, even her parents didn't know the full backstory to Paul. So you have to gain that trust. And I think that's when it shows on the screen that they're they're trusting you, to tell their full story.
Did they at any point, like during the making of the series or afterwards, tell you if like what was the impact of like discussing those things out loud? Because just as you said, kind of like when we're given the chance to really speak about something that is troubling for us, the mere fact of just having to create a timeline in your head and create some distance from you and the way you're telling the story is kind of healing somehow. So, and all these young
Therapeutic,
people,
yeah.
yeah, very therapeutic. So did they at any point tell you about how was the impact of like sharing their experiences with you guys for them?
I mean, I think it is therapeutic for people to be able to, have their own voice in their own story, especially for Morgan and the kids on the boat. Like, they were in the news so much when that tragedy happened, and there was so much speculation as to what was going on that night. And so a lot of people spoke for them, and they were like harassed by media so much. So they were very hesitant to speak to us. But like, again, Mike was emblematic in gaining people's trust, and they saw our past work, and we were able to, be a great collaborative team around that. But yeah, it's a lot for people to sit, but I think it's cathartic too.
100%.
Oh, great. The series is also crafted around actual footage and audio of the events that took place, like with a lot of police audio recordings, like forensic reports, pictures, like even a call from prison. Like, tell us a little bit about getting access to all of these materials, and how did you work with them?
You want to go for it, Mike?
I can give you just a baseline of different, there's different stages of of making these, and you go through FOIA requests to access certain things. So the dash cam video, those come through FOIA requests. And so does the phone calls that you hear with Alec when he says, at the end of the show, hey Bo, has this been on Netflix yet? That stuff is a process, and sometimes it can change the show itself if you land something and at different points. So that's a big part I think for us, when we're making stuff, is getting all the archival, the videos. You're asking characters that you're sitting with to give us personal items. So the stuff you see with Paul and Morgan, Morgan gave that stuff to us. She trusted us to tell her story. And what we say, listen, we need to humanize you, and we need to humanize the characters around you, like Paul. Without that stuff, you're just hearing people say stuff. But when you see things, you see Paul playing with a little kid, it adds all these elements. So there's different stages. It's archivals from characters, it's FOIA requests, getting some of the legal stuff, and then it's just about, marrying it to the story.
Yeah, that was great.
Tell us now about like the more fictional parts of the work in these kind of tropes in true crime, like the reenactments, where you go all the way there and you give us bodies in the floor and like a little bit of like a head wound and things like that. So tell us a little bit about, how were the discussions in regarding those things, and how did you crafted those into the story?
Yeah, I mean, the reenactments, always we want to be as abstract as possible and not too literal with bodies on the floor. But we want to really make it so our reenactments can seamlessly weave into the discovery footage that we have. So like there will be reenactments that we'll do that look like security camera footage, so that it's all in one template, one style, so you don't get a bump in your eyes like, oh, this is a reenactment, I'm totally taken out. We want to keep people involved and emotionally hooked in. And a lot of the discovery we have would be audio, and sometimes we need to illustrate and fill in the gaps between dash cam and audio and people doing original camera interviews. I was going to say OCM, but interviews. Like I'm in a tech brain right now. But
yeah, that's right. You have to try to, because it can get jarring, like Julia said. If you reenactments, you're just like, oh gosh, this looks totally wacky and it doesn't fit. And the key is, and we had to do real reenactments in this for a couple of reasons. The hospital stuff was, we were respecting a legal process and didn't want to cross any lines there. We could have potentially shown actual footage, but we actually went and shot it. And it's actually a breath of fresh air. I think it's like, in a way, fun, where sit down, and these interviews are really stressful on everybody. Your Julia is sitting in interviews for 8 hours, living, talking to people. It's really hard. So when you can go and even though the subject matter is heavy, it is kind of dealing with, we had our friends shooting like some of the hospital footage, just people that we knew to come in and do it. So, and but it adds a lot. It's in some of the footage, I'm sure you couldn't tell between what was boat iPhone stuff and the real stuff, but there was a mixture of stuff specifically there that you try to make it feel like one thing.
Great. Tell us a little bit now about working with the journalists like Will Fox and Valerie Bauer-Lane from the Wall Street Journal, and like the attorneys, the private detectives. Like, tell us all these people that are also in the part of doing the research about everything that was going on at the same time as you were. How is that, those collaborations?
I mean, those collaborations are essential. I mean, we learned so much through those resources and their resources, and then we interviewed them, and we're actually learning about the case as we're interviewing them, and like more things unfold. But it's not like, even though those characters of the lawyers and investigative reporters have so much data, let's say, they also have a way that they, particularly in their personality and style, retained it. So they become they jump off the page of what they're reporting to, and we kind of curate it in the piece, so the audience isn't like bombarded with so much information, but we just give a little bit here and there to give structure to an episode.
Yeah, they all have different personalities, as you can see. That we specifically wanted to get a couple different journalists from different parts of, I would say, the country, almost, because we had Michael DeWitt, who's literally from Hampton, and like rubbed elbows with the Murdaughs and had a tough time reporting on it that time because he was part of the culture. And then Will Folks, who's kind of a South Carolina journalist, and then Val, who is a national reporter. And I think we use them in those specific cases. And it's they're, like Julia said, they're crucial to help to tie the story in for an audience. And as far as the private investigator stuff, we love that. I love our character. We had so much more stuff. I could have used him. He's a kooky character that could have been like a bigger part of it, but sometimes you just have to in spots.
And for our audience members, we have a lot of people that come to Doc NYC and the things that we show that are filmmakers themselves. In terms of like the legal ramifications of working with things that are already part of the news or articles and stuff like that, is there certain things that you have to clear? Do you bring them on board as collaborators? How does working with things that are already news out there, how does that work for a documentary?
Yes, so things that are already out there that we use. I mean, when things are out there in the public eye, it's, we're happy to, incorporate it into the piece. In terms, your question is about like legally how we use it,
Yeah,
or just
legal.
creatively?
Yeah, like, do you have to buy the rights, for the
Yeah, so
articles,
we have
or-
a great archival team, an archival producer that really knows all the ins and outs of the legal process to use other footage that's, already published. So yeah, it's either buying the rights or using fair use tools to have it work.
Yeah, we have many lawyers that it has to go through many different stages, and you have a specific lawyer that literally covers defamation or fair use. So everything we use is either licensed if it has to be licensed, or it's fair use, and it goes through that rigorous process to make sure all the checks and balances are good before it goes to air.
And let's talk a little bit about episode 3, because it's so full on and it bring you like to the extent of all the criminal activities from the family. It covers the death of Stephen Smith, the potential murder of Miss Gloria, the housekeeper. Then you introduced us to Alex's drug addiction, which I think is also a really crucial part of the story, and his insurance fraud. And then we go back to like the double murder potentially. So in all of this chaos of things that were happening simultaneously from the past, from the present, and like potentially from the future, tell us a little bit about making sense of the story in that sense, and like using it to like tie all the loose ends together.
Yeah, I think we wanted to bring all these elements in the last episode, again, to show a pattern that we as filmmakers not necessarily want to indict anybody, but we are showing the material that is present over the years that have happened. And it's really for the audience to decide what is going on in this family. I mean, these are things that have happened in the news where, you know, with Stephen Smith, there's a lot of allegations around how he died. And, you know, that tied also to the Murdaughs. Same with Miss Gloria, died, you know, in the front of the house on the stairs. And so, and then we find out that Alec had stolen, you know, her insurance money essentially from her death. So yeah, I think it's really for the audience to put the pieces together, and like the climax of there's more to the eye than the boat crash, and then there's a murder of the family itself. So it's very intense. I don't know, Mike,
Yeah, no, as you
maybe
said, exactly right. I mean, it's a very convoluted story, so I think you have to make it, simplify it, and lay it out so that you can see. I think there's still unknowns, obviously. I think that the Gloria thing, we feel pretty confident we know what happened there, and we illustrate it with at least the fact that we don't think the dogs had tripped her, and that Alec, you know, wasn't there. He made up the story about the dogs, and then people went on and used that for a way to get money. And as far as Stephen Smith, I think we told the story the way it was documented in police reports, and we gave those theories, and we felt like we had to shine a light on that. And I think you could see even in today's press that it, you know, the power of Netflix has sparked the light on all these investigators, and they've now exhumed Stephen, and they're looking at it's putting a lot of pressure. And I think you're gonna, hopefully they'll figure some stuff out there in the near future. But yeah, you have to just lay it out as it is, and you know, that's what we did. And you know, there's obviously more there, but you know, I think that with how many things were there, I think we had to do it in a very specific way for that episode, and it had a lot in it, that episode.
But something that it really is interesting too is that how you bring to life something that is kind of abstract, which is the lack of proper investigation that all these events, you know, were having, and how the local police were embedded with the Murdaughs, and we're not really, you know, looking into things that deeply. And you know, there's a moment where you even talk about, you know, like after the double murder situation, like where like the caliber of the gun that kills, you know, at least one of the two bodies matches one that the family owns, and yet the police didn't go and take it. And then you miraculously come up with this amazing like aerial footage where you can see, you know, them leaving the house with all their guns and like emptying the house of the guns, which is like pretty suspicious. It's like, did that ever kind of like, did the police ever like ask you for that footage? Are you doing more investigating than the local police? Like, what's going on there?
We've actually sent stuff to the police that we've discovered in some capacity. I can tell you that it's an interesting thing, law enforcement. I think for the boat, you see hands out that there was things happening, that the Murdaughs are so entrenched in this area at so many different levels: police, judges, lawyers. They had this control over everybody. So there's a lot of people that maybe not necessarily did went out of their way to do something wrong, but they received a lot of favors, and through those favors, they felt like they had to maybe turn an eye. So yeah, there's there's definitely things I think that are happening now because of the things that we showed, and things are moving in certain directions because of the stuff that we uncovered. And I think those things will still unfold over the next couple of years, because there's so many things happening still. He still has to go on trial for all the Satterfield money, which is supposedly happening in the next month.
So to end with, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is next for you. Because I have like a personal question that I was going to ask you, perhaps, which is to do with your production company, the Cinemark, and how you two, but also with Jenner First, the other director, created this wonder production house, and you keep working together. So because also I'm a filmmaker and a lot of our audience members are filmmakers, it's pretty great when you see success stories of people that have created like a wonderful team and they keep working together on projects. So can you tell us a little bit about your team?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working together like over a decade. We've had the company for like 12 years plus, and we started in documentary filmmaking, working on a show, Brick City, which was centered in Newark, New Jersey, about the whole city, the mayor, police department, school principals. And so, I personally I started off as a fine art documentary photographer. I've always been interested in people's lives, but through the camera and through verite was really where I started. And so when we all came together with all of our different talents, I mean, first of all, in this world of documentary filmmaking and filmmaking, it's a team effort. Like there's no like, okay, I'm a Jackson Pollock, I'm just going to go by myself into the canvas. Like, yes, we can all Pollock ourselves, but we come back together and we share in the, intellectual riches we all bring to the table. I mean, I could go on and on about the company, and I would just say I'm so grateful for all of the projects that we have had the opportunity to make over the years. It's been so rewarding, so enriching as a filmmaker to continue to keep going. And we really haven't stopped. I mean, we've been just doing project after project, and thank God, I think all of them have been hits.
Made some kind of
I don't mean to be crass.
But we are looking, we're developing some stuff. We're out in the market with stuff. So, and we're also looking, people we can only do so much as far as they're really taxing to work on these documentaries. So we're looking for other filmmakers too, to come in and bring in and shepherd and do these things while we oversee. So, we're always looking for different projects that make sense for us. And we have a few things that are coming out. We have a project that's coming out on Amazon in June, Shining Happy People, in regards to the Duggars and IBLP. And, we have some other stuff in the works. So, yeah, but again, if you know anybody with some good stories, you can always send them to our general Cinemark button.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these insights with us. It was a joy talking to you today. Thank you at home for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Netflix, for bringing us this great series.